Friends, if you love stories that have it all, genius breakthroughs, bitter betrayals, state secrets, and weapons that were ahead of their time, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to the channel and smash that like button. And down in the comments, I want to hear from you. Do you think this revolution was possible, or was the system destined to bury it? Your opinion is crucial because this story is living proof of how these battles play out. Now, let's dive in. The Forgotten Revolution. The sheer audacity of the Shiryayev rifle and the cartridge that almost changed everything. What if I told you that in the heart of the Soviet military-industrial complex, in the early 1960s, a small team of brilliant young engineers designed a rifle and cartridge so advanced, so revolutionary, that it could have made the legendary AK-47 obsolete before it even became a global icon? This isn't an alternate history novel. This is the true, untold story of the AO-27, a weapon system born from a radical idea, fueled by youthful arrogance, and ultimately crushed by a combination of harsh physics, brutal economics, and bitter personal rivalries. This is more than a story about a gun. It's a story about ambition, about challenging the establishment, and about the high price of innovation. It's a saga where the lines between genius and folly, and between visionary and opportunist, become dangerously blurred. So buckle up. We're going back to the height of the Cold War, to the secretive research institutes where the future of warfare was being forged one controversial idea at a time. The world on the brink of change, the Cold War crucible. To understand the sheer audacity of this project, you need to feel the era. The year is 1960. The Cold War isn't just a political standoff. It's a white-hot technological race. In Vietnam, American soldiers are beginning to discover the fatal flaws of their new M16 rifle, its sensitivity to dirt, its need for pristine maintenance. Meanwhile, the Soviet soldier is armed with the AK-47, a weapon revered for its brutal reliability. It's a hammer. It works. Always. But this reliability came at a cost. The AK's 7.62mm cartridge was powerful, but that power meant fierce recoil, a steep, arching bullet trajectory that made long-range aim difficult, and a weight penalty for the soldier carrying hundreds of rounds. The entire global arms community was wrestling with one central problem: how to increase a bullet's muzzle velocity. Why? It's simple physics. A faster bullet flies flatter, a more direct path, meaning less guesswork for the soldier at varying distances. It extends effective range and can improve accuracy. The quest for speed led engineers to look at the big brothers of small arms, artillery. During the Second World War, the Germans had pioneered the use of discarding sabot, fin-stabilized projectiles for their anti-tank guns. The principle was brilliant. Use a lightweight, high-velocity projectile to achieve unparalleled armor penetration. The idea was in the air, a tantalizing what if. What if we could miniaturize this principle for an infantryman's rifle? Create a small, lightweight, dart-like flechette, launch it at incredible speeds, and stabilize it not with the spin from rifling, but with fins like a tiny arrow? And here's the kicker. While most people think this was an American idea from their ambitious SPIW program, they were late to the party. The Soviets were there first. The Titans of Tula and the spark of genius. This brings us to our main characters. Picture a closed, secretive Soviet research institute, an II-61, the future TSI Tokmash. This is where the state's brightest minds worked on its most sensitive projects. In Department Number 21, focused on high-velocity aircraft cannons, worked three young, fiercely ambitious designers: Arkady Shipyanov, 33 years old, Vasily Gryazev, 32 years old, and our protagonist, Dmitry Ivanovich Shiryayev. Shipyanov and Gryazev would later become legends, the fathers of the famous GSH series of aircraft cannons. But at this moment, they were just brilliant young guns, burning with new ideas. According to the legend Shiryayev himself would later tell, the idea was born almost by chance. Hearing that their neighbors at NI-24 were experimenting with subcaliber shells for anti-aircraft guns, the trio had a eureka moment. What if we do this, but for a rifle? Shiryayev's memoirs paint a picture of almost cinematic inspiration. The idea was extremely appealing. I spent less than a full working day sketching out the draft design of the cartridge case and bullet. Shiryayev didn't even need an hour to calculate the significant advantages of the new bullet's trajectory over a conventional one. Shiryayev, whose drawing board was right there, sketched out a schematic of the weapon. Can you imagine it? In a single day, a project that could have rewritten the textbooks was born. Youth, genius, and sheer nerve. This was the fuel for their team. They named the bullet OPS, Opernaya, Podkalbernaya, Strelkovaya, Feathered Subcaliber Infantry. It sounded like something from a science fiction novel. And in many ways it was. Clash with the system or torn to shreds. But in the USSR, no brilliant idea, no matter how inspired, could escape the grinding wheels of bureaucracy and peer review. And this is where our tech drama turns into a human one. The young wolves took their idea to the Institute's chief engineer, Oleg Kuzmin. Significantly, Shiryayev was the one who presented, positioning himself as the project's lead visionary. Kuzmin, a smart man but not a cartridge specialist, called in the professional Boris Semyonovich Semin, head of the cartridge department, a laureate of the Stalin Prize. And then came the moment that has shattered countless inventions. Semyon, an experienced, battle-hardened expert who had seen hundreds of revolutionary projects fail against the unyielding laws of physics and manufacturing, looked at these youthful blueprints and tore our idea to shreds. Let's try to visualize that office. On one side, three genius aviationists smelling of the gunpowder of new ideas. On the other, the venerable cartridge expert Semyon, for whom these sketches represented not a dream, but a nightmare of impracticality. He undoubtedly pointed out dozens of fatal flaws: manufacturing complexity, reliability concerns, astronomical cost. He was the skeptic who saw reality, not the fantasy. And then, the pivotal twist. Instead of backing his expert, Kuzmin turned on him with a furious rant. I haven't seen anything worthwhile from you for years, and you still have the audacity to badmouth others. This was pure, unadulterated protege protection. The young and promising were being backed against the old guard. Shiryayev was literally forced into Semyon's department to prove his concept was viable. Remember this moment. Later, Shiryayev would sneer about the group of talented and knowledgeable designers standing behind Sergeant Kalashnikov. But wasn't it the powerful Kuzmin standing behind him, Shiryayev, on that fateful day? It's a classic tale. When the system helps you, it's justice. When it helps another, it's cronyism. A technical detective story where brilliance met a wall. So, what was this miraculous weapon? Let's dissect the AO-27 system. The cartridge. This was an engineering masterpiece and a manufacturing nightmare, all rolled into one. The bullet, a steel needle, a mere 3 millimeters in diameter, with fins giving it a span of 8 millimeters. The sabot, the most complex part. The bullet was guided through the barrel by a two-sector pulling sabot. Imagine a hollow cylinder split into two halves, clasping the tail of the dart. This sabot was supposed to fall away after exiting the muzzle. The case. They used a cartridge case from the Nagant revolver, a brilliantly simple solution that showed the inventors were at least trying to be resourceful. Now, consider the manufacturing description from the patent. I'm paraphrasing, but you'll get the point. The bullets were to be made from special steel stock, ground to shape. The sabots were to be made from tiny tubes that had to be cut, notched, crimped onto the bullet, and machined. It reads like a recipe for a master watchmaker, not for a worker on a factory floor tasked with producing millions per month. As an ordinary person looking at this, I understand. Hand assembling a dozen of these for an experiment is one thing. But setting up a mass production line under the potential pressures of war? That's utopian. It's no wonder that Dvoryanov, another great weapons designer, would later tactfully note that after reading this description, one understands Semyon's position perfectly. The AO-27 rifle. This wonder cartridge needed a gun to fire it. The resulting weapon was about 893 millimeters long, weighing just over 3.2 kilograms. It used a classic Kalashnikov-style system, gas operation and a rotating bolt. But it had one key feature. The barrel was smoothbore. Yes, like a shotgun. The fin-stabilized dart didn't need rifling. Its muzzle velocity was an incredible 1,060 meters per second. For comparison, the AK-47 manages around 710. The difference is staggering. The trial by fire, triumph or catastrophe. The moment of truth arrived, field testing. What did the shooting tell us? Shiryayev, in his interviews, claimed his rifle's advantage over the AK-47 was overwhelming, save for 2 points: stopping power and cartridge cost. It sounds promising, doesn't it? But let's look at the cold, hard text of the official range reports from 1962. And here we find the project's death sentence: lethality and stopping power. The 3mm needle would zip through a target, causing minimal tissue damage. The report states, bluntly, significantly inferior to the standard 7.62 mm cartridge. The stopping power of this bullet is also less. There are no realistic ways to increase the lethality. Imagine a soldier hitting an enemy, only for that enemy to keep coming. In close combat, that's a death sentence for the shooter. Accuracy, here, too, was failure. In single-shot fire at 100 meters, the AO-27's accuracy was nearly twice as bad as the AKM's. Automatic fire was largely ineffective. Reliability, a fatal flaw, emerged. After about 150 rounds, aluminum from the sabots would build up inside the smooth bore, throwing the darts off course. The weapon would essentially break after a short firefight. So, we have a paradox. The cartridge was fast and flat shooting, but it was a poor man-stopper and an inaccurate one at that. And the rifle itself couldn't sustain a fight. The backroom wars and a legacy of resentment. This is where the story shifts from technical to deeply personal. The project was being taken away from Shiryayev. He writes with bitterness about being sidelined, returned to his main work, and replaced as lead by his own assistant, Ivan Kazanov, who, Shiryayev claims, was ordered by the vindictive Semyon to write a report discrediting our proposal. What comes next is even more sour. Shiryayev snipes that the cartridge guys fed off this topic for a good 17 more years. Dvoryanov VN finished the work, eventually creating a pretty good sub-caliber cartridge based on a rifle case. Let's unpack this. What likely happened? A young, ambitious, but relatively inexperienced designer, whose raw idea failed its first practical exam, was gently removed from a project that required deep, specialized expertise. The work was handed over to professional cartridge designers who spent the next decade and a half trying to make the complex concept workable. And they made progress, albeit with different approaches. Shiryayev perceived this not as a logical development process, but as a personal theft of his brainchild. And this brings us to the most revealing moment. To truly understand Shiryayev's character, we must confront his infamous 2002 interview, where he declared Mikhail Kalashnikov was not a gunsmith but a frontman, and that an unknown sergeant with a 7th grade education couldn't have beaten experienced designers without a group of knowing, talented, and powerful people. Suddenly, his complaints about the cartridge guys take on a new light. The man who himself benefited from Kuzmin's protection now accuses others of the same. The designer who never successfully shepherded a single design into mass production speaks with contempt about the genius whose weapon became the most prolific in human history. The bitter irony is palpable. The epilogue: why the revolution was canceled. So why did the AO-27 never equip a single Soviet soldier? The reasons are a layered cake of technology, economics, and strategy. Technological immaturity. Manufacturing Shiryayev's original cartridge design was fiendishly complex and prohibitively expensive. The cost per round could have been tens of times higher than the standard cartridge. Performance failure. The inadequate stopping power was a deal-breaker for any army. A soldier's primary weapon must guarantee the enemy is neutralized. The rise of a better alternative. At the same exact time, work began on a new, small-caliber, low-impulse cartridge, the 5.45 to 39mm. It solved the same problems: higher velocity, flatter trajectory, less recoil, but was far cheaper, more reliable, and easier to produce. History chose the 545. Army conservatism. Re-equipping a multi-million-man army is a titanic undertaking. A new weapon must be not just slightly better, but overwhelmingly superior. The AO-27 was not. The project was closed, but its legacy is immense. It was a bold, desperate leap into the future. It showed the limits of the possible and defined the boundaries that could not be crossed at that time. It was satisfying one's own curiosity at the state's expense in the very best sense of the phrase. Without such daring experiments, there is no progress. And so, our saga of the Forgotten Revolution comes to a close. It was a story of genius, ambition, betrayal, and the harsh truths of reality. So what do you think, friends? Was Shiryayev right to feel wronged by the system? Or was the system right to filter out a raw and expensive idea? I want to hear your verdict. Let's have a debate, like retired colonels arguing over old times. And of course, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. There are more incredible stories from secret archives and forgotten design bureaus on the way. Leave a like if you enjoyed this deep dive, and share this story with your friends. Let them learn about the history that almost was. Until next time,